We are happy that they're sharing their expertise with us today. And we also welcome and thank our hosts. I am Catherine Labatt. I am program chair for La Creole, and I would like to thank the program committee, Patricia Shake Snyder, Pat Shake Snyder, and Jennifer Quizaire. And I would like to introduce our board of directors, Vernon Eaton.
Thank you, Catherine, and also as chair of the board of directors for Louisiana Creole Research Association, as we are midway through our 21st year. And that's something that we celebrated with a gala this past October. And we have several of our founding members here. If you would raise your hand so that folks can acknowledge the founders, some of the founders. That. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank Xavier University, as you will hear, the only Catholic HBCU, is that correct? And also Dr. Robin Vander, the Rosemary Foundation Professor of Liberal Arts here at Xavier University, and Elizabeth Rhodes, who is our liaison from La Creole with Xavier, who's unable to be here at present. We had our first free meeting open to the public. It's part of our mission, our charge of education. In our mission statement, we are here to educate, to celebrate, and to do research. And we are doing all three here today. Back in just a few months ago, Warren Bell, under the program guidance of Catherine Labatt, Warren Bell hosted a hidden history about the very history of primarily St. Louis No. 2 Cemetery, which has a tremendous history that we don't yet know all the outcomes. We are working with Catholic cemeteries. We are trying to restore tombs. That's an ambition of La Creole as well. And I'd like to welcome you all to our August 15th member meeting. Those who have our members and those who wish to join, we will have a general membership meeting August 15th at a site to be determined. And then our annual conference will be right here at the Convocation Annex on Xavier campus. And it will be entitled Gumbo Creole, a synthesis of cultures. And Dr. Baham in the audience, if you would raise your hand, chair of the conference committee. Thank you, Dr. Baham. Dr. Baham, just a few weeks ago, also was chair of the repatriation of the 19, an event that was hosted at Dillard University, and it's an ongoing project to repatriate the 19 individuals who were wrongfully desecrated allegedly in the pursuit of junk science, if I may so bold. And now I turn the program back to Catherine.
I would like to introduce Wendy A. Gaudet. Wendy A. Gaudet is the author of the monograph Sunset Limited, an autobiography of Creole, an exploration of the Creole migration from Louisiana to Los Angeles, which reflects her own family's history. Using personal narrative, oral history, poetry, creative nonfiction, and autoethnography. Gaudet dwells into what it means to be Creole before and after the Creole migration of the 20th century, and what it means to be Creole in Louisiana and in the diaspora. The daughter of an evolutionary biologist father and a devout Catholic mother, Gaudet writes about her own return to New Orleans and grapples with how and if she fits into Catholic Creole Louisiana. She's a graduate of California State University Northridge, Louisiana State University, and New York University. She teaches history here at Xavier. Our hostess, Wendy A. Claudette.
Hello. Thank you for coming to Xavier. I've been teaching here for 25 years and sometimes we have challenges like this today, but it's all good. And I'm happy to welcome you to campus and happy to welcome you to this panel discussion today, which I think is going to be really interesting. And we have a nice broad spectrum of speakers today. And I was just asked to offer some opening remarks since some of the work that I do has to do with our Catholic heritage as Creoles. But as Ms. Lavat said, I am a representative of the California migration. My family left here, actually I'm a product of two migrations, which I will talk about very briefly. My family migrated to Los Angeles. My mother's parents in 1930, which is very early in the history of the migration, and my father's parents in 1945, which is closer to when most people left. I will say that my ancestors attended, my grandmother attended Our Lady of Peace, which is out in Vacherie, Louisiana. My grandfather, St. Aug or St. Augustine in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. And here in New Orleans, my family attended St. Stephen's, which is on Napoleon Avenue, St. Joan of Arc, a very small church up in the Riverbend area, and of course, Corpus Christi, which is where my grandparents were married. And when my family migrated to California, so many of us have this experience. They settled in West Los Angeles, and they attended Holy Name of Jesus, which some people in Los Angeles call Little Corpus Christi, right? Or another term for it is Corpus Christi West. My grandfather was an ordained deacon in that parish. I think he wanted to be a priest, but he also wanted to have a family. And so being a deacon was a way that he could maybe do both of those things. Some of us attended St. Agnes. Some of us attended other parishes on the West Coast, St. Bernadette, Transfiguration. And many of us in the Los Angeles diaspora had family members who ordained. I had a cousin who was a priest here in Louisiana, another cousin who became a cloistered nun in Wisconsin, and we have not seen her in 6 decades because she's in a cloister now. So I grew up in yet another migration. So when my family settled in Los Angeles, my father moved my family out to the suburbs. And so we grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which when I was growing up was largely Jewish. And instead of attending a Catholic Creole parish, I attended a suburban parish, which was majority white, Our Lady of Lourdes. And so we had this sort of interesting experience of being suburban Catholics in a Jewish community during most of our lives. And then occasionally we went out to Los Angeles and had a Creole Catholic experience in a parish that was majority New Orleans Creoles, many of them from downtown New Orleans, like my grandmother, her name was Rita Rue. And so on the weekends, we would go to Holy Name of Jesus. We would eat Creole food, hear the accents of Louisiana. Our grandparents had peers who had also migrated. And my grandmother sewed many of the tapestries in the parish with images that came from Louisiana. And then my sisters and I would go out to the valley and have a very different experience as sort of minority Catholics in a Jewish community. And so I've written a little bit about, for us as California Creoles, for many of us, Catholicism is sort of a tie to our past and a tie to our history. Many of us left the church. Many of us became Protestant Christians. I myself am a Buddhist. I converted to Buddhism, ironically, here in New Orleans. And many of us continue to practice. But Catholicism in Los Angeles, in the diaspora, was really an opportunity for us to connect with our Louisiana family. And so in some ways, it represents a tie to the past more than a living faith and a living practice today. So I did a little bit of writing about that, and as a representative of the diaspora, I wanted to make that clear as we speak about Creole Louisiana, that I have returned to Louisiana, but I am a representative of that diaspora. And I'm really grateful to be here today. I am going to introduce our speakers. And for some of our speakers, we will have images on the screen. And for others, we will not. So today we are going to be, all of us, open to the panel discussion. So our first speaker is Sarah Waits of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And the title of the presentation is Catholic Archives, Recording the History of New Orleans since 1720. Sarah Waits is a research archivist at the Archdiocese of New Orleans. She received a certificate of archival studies from LSU, her master's degree in history from UNO, and a bachelor's in history and creative writing from LSU. She previously worked at the Amistad Research Center, the National World War II Museum, and the Herman Grimmat and Gallier Historic House museums here in New Orleans. Ms. Waits served as the president of the Greater New Orleans Archivists Organization from 2023 to 2024. Sarah has presented on Catholic archives and research at conferences nationwide and recently received grant funding to scan and index some of the oldest sacramental records in the Archdiocesan archives related to particularly enslaved individuals. Sarah is a licensed tour guide and enjoys leading history-focused walking tours in the French Quarter. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. And I look forward to talking just a little bit about some of the types of records that we have in our archive. And I'll kind of be focusing on, sacramental records and some other items of note that we have. And so we're going to get started. So the Archdiocese of New Orleans is kind of the seat of the Catholic Church in the state of Louisiana. So it encompasses 8 civil parishes. We have records for more than 130 churches, records for 6 cemeteries, and our collection spans over 300 years. And so you can see on the map the parishes that we have records for, starting at the mouth of the river in Plaquemines, St. Bernard, going up the river until we get to St. John the Baptist. And then when you get to St. James Parish, you get into the Baton Rouge Diocese. So the archives are founded because after the Good Friday fire in 1788, the auxiliary bishop ordered that all records must be kept in a safe place. This order created the cathedral archives in the sacristy of the St. Louis Cathedral, which became the Archdiocesan Archives. For much of the 20th century, our archives were housed at the Ursuline Convent in the French Quarter. And then after Hurricane Katrina, the majority of the collection was moved to another location. Our main office now is at the Chancery, which is the Archdiocese's offices off of South Carrollton. So this note was actually written into one of our baptism registries and basically says on the 21st of March of 1788, on Holy Friday, there was a big fire that burned up the city. The city was all wood, including the church. So, there's always these fun little notes within the records. During the Battle of New Orleans, the priest wrote about the English arriving. When Lafayette came to visit in 1825, there's a little marginal note in the record. So just sort of another way of doing record keeping. So the Office of Archives and Records is responsible for storing, maintaining, and providing access to all institutional material, including sacramental records, correspondence, parish histories, school records, religious orders and organizations from 1720 to the present. And we do have a nice collection of photographs as well. You can see this is for a confirmation class from Blessed Sacrament from the 1950s. Pardon? Oh, louder? Okay. So this record I have highlighted because this is the very first record on the first page of the St. Charles Borromeo Church, which is in Destrehan. It is for an enslaved child born of an indigenous woman. So what's really cool, I guess, about our records is that, we have, in some cases, the only mention of a person in a paper record might be within our sacramental records. This record is from 1739. This child, Pierre Louis, was the son of Manon, who was owned by Mr. Derensburg, right? We all know about the Derensburg family upriver. So of course, you guys are familiar with New Orleans history. We're under the French for about 50 years, transitioned to the Spanish in the 1760s. And you see that change within handwriting and languages that our records are kept in as well. So first 50 so years, we're in French, then we're in Spanish. Père Antoine, Father Antonio de Sedea, was a priest at the cathedral until the 1830s. So a lot of our records written by him are recorded in Spanish into the 1830s, even though that's 30 years after the Louisiana Purchase. We really don't see a lot of English, especially within our cathedral records, until the early 20th century. So from the Spanish period through the postbellum era, many volumes of sacramental records were segregated by race. So under the Spanish, starting around 1777, they started having separate registries, one for free people of color and enslaved people, and a separate one for white people. So the volumes were indexed, especially for enslaved people, by the enslaver's surname. And so this is a record for a woman who was enslaved by the Grima family. As you guys heard, I used to work at the Herman Grima House and did an extensive research into enslaved people owned by those families. But Agatha, who this record is for, the actual entry you can see on the left-hand side is indexed under Bert Grima, who was her enslaver. So we have a series of books, about 25 volumes of indices that were published by the Archdiocese. Some people in the genealogy world know them as the Gray Books, right? The archives of the Archdiocese. But they only included records for people with surnames. And since enslaved people were not identified with surnames, they were left out of those publications. So, probably 60% of the records that we have from the 18th century are not actually included in those records. So something to think about. So baptism records are also really important because they are legal records that can grant freedom. This is a record for a child who was baptized in St. Bernard, and he, in the record, his father is named, as is his mother. So typically for records of enslaved children, only the mother would be mentioned. But this child's mother's enslaver is also his father, Pedro Barton. And so there's a little note that the priest wrote that the child was granted freedom by a note given to the priest by the godfather. So this is sort of enshrined into the record that this child, the son of his enslaver is being granted his freedom. So these are a couple records for Domingo and Maria Antonia. They were enslaved by the Ursuline sisters. So upon their arrival in the colony in 1727, the Ursuline nuns were enslavers and continued to enslave people through the Civil War. Many Catholic religious were enslavers, the Jesuits, Capuchins, high-level people in the church, bishops, archbishops. Father, Antoine, Père Antoine was constantly buying and selling enslaved individuals. But what's interesting about these two records in particular is that these are adults being baptized. Under the French and the Spanish, all enslaved people brought to the colony were required to be baptized Catholic, whether or not that was something they were particularly interested in. But it does mean that we have a paper trail for those individuals. And in this case, you can see that their nation, where they were born, their ethnicity is actually being recorded as well. So it's recorded as Maniga, but it refers to the Mandinka people. And then on this next one, we can see that pretty clearly as well. We have the Congo nation, the Igbo nation, and the Senegal nation are all highlighted for these three enslaved individuals. So prior to the abolishment of the international slave trade in 1808, adults are being baptized at a pretty high rate, as well as children. And so this was from the first page of the St. Mary Registry, St. Mary Church and Chapel associated with the Ursuline Convent in the French Quarter. But they were all baptized on the same day because it was customary leading up to the Holy Week, especially the week before Easter, that they would have large group baptisms. And so priests would travel out to the plantations or to more rural areas and have, 50, 60 people baptized all in the same day at the same time. This is an example of a marriage record. Some of these names might be familiar. We have Santiago or Philip Harris, who married Marie Laveau. So this is her marriage record from the cathedral from 1819. And also recorded by Père Antoine, so of course in Spanish. What's really helpful with these records is that we are given not only the names of the two parties, but also where they're from. So Santiago Paris was from Saint-Domingue. His parents are listed. He's the son of Santiago Paris. And then Marie Laveau says that she's born in New Orleans, the daughter of Carlos Laveau and Marguerite Darnetal. And so, this is just super helpful when you're doing any kind of genealogy research or looking for individuals. Marriage records can be a real treasure trove of super important information about an individual. This is another marriage record. Louis Congo, who some of you may recognize, he was the executioner under the French. He married an enslaved woman, Suzanne, who was owned by the Company of the Indies. And this is their marriage record from 1728. This is just 1 year after the first St. Louis church was constructed on Jackson Square. So that first church was completed in 1727, and this is a marriage from 1728. We also have funeral records. This is the funeral record for the widow Couvent. Some of you may be familiar with her name, and I'll be talking a little bit more about her later on. But what's really helpful in this record is it tells us, Justine Firmin was one name that she went by, but you can see on the left-hand side, she's the widow, Gabrielle Bernard Couvent. Bernard Couvent was born enslaved by the Ursuline nuns. And that is why his last name is Couvent, because he was born at the convent. And so Marie purchased Bernard and then ended up getting married to him and basically granting him his freedom. This says that she was born in Africa, and it says how old she was, about 80 years when she died. And it says that she died at 5 hours in the afternoon, and that she's buried in St. Louis Cemetery number 2. We also have burials in the archives. This is a burial for Homer Plessy. This is his burial record from when he died in 1925. And the Labots are the undertaker. So, in addition to the sacramental records, which kind of make up the core of our collection, we also have tons of records about individual parishes. This is St. Catherine Parish, which was established in the former St. Joseph Church on Tulane Avenue in 1895. Archbishop Jansen felt that there needed to be a Black Catholic parish in the city, specifically for the Black Catholics. With the rise of Jim Crow segregation, a lot of Black Catholics were kind of being pushed to the sides in their churches. And so he wanted to create a safe space. And then over the next 20 years, every parish that existed basically had a Black parish established in the same geographical area. So, the formation of Blessed Sacrament, Corpus Christi, All Saints in Algiers, all of these churches opened in the early 20th century. That church was torn down in the 1950s. The St. Catherine Parish moved uptown to become St. Catherine Drexel Parish. And now Tulane University Medical Center kind of has that block. You can actually see on the right-hand side, that's a picture of the church from the top of Charity Hospital. So it was right across the street. So this one I think is particularly interesting for talking about Creoles in New Orleans. So Father Claude Maestri, kind of known as an abolitionist priest, was in charge of St. Rose of Lima Church on Bayou Road. When the Union came in 1862, Father Maestri said he was going to no longer segregate the sacramental records. And he was heavily censured by, I should say, Confederate sympathizer, Archbishop Odin, for integrating the sacramental registries and preaching about racial equality. So St. Rose of Lima was actually interdicted, meaning the whole church was shut down for over a year, and Father Maestri was kicked out. But he started a new church for Black Creoles at Claiborne and Ursuline Streets called Holy Name of Jesus. This schismatic church operated from October of 1863 until mid-1871 and was never formally recognized by the Archdiocese. But what's cool about this paper is he's writing in the sacramental registry who the board of trustees are and how they're going to be responsible for the building materials. So you can see the first three names, Etienne Doliol, Charles Honore. It says they're responsible for the bricks. Then you have the next group of men responsible for the wood. Then you have at the bottom the guys responsible for the sand. So just really interesting to think about this community, coming together, gathering materials during wartime, and having a new church built. So I mentioned I would talk about the widow Couvent again. So Marie Couvent was born on the west coast of Africa around 1757. She was kidnapped as a child and enslaved in Saint-Domingue, which of course we know as Haiti. She came to New Orleans in 1804 as a free woman and established herself as an influential businesswoman. And in her will from November of 1832, the widow Couvent left a plot of land for the creation of a school for orphans of color. So that's what she wrote, or what was written in French. Basically, it says, I want and command that my lot at the corner of Grandhomme and Union Streets be a dedicated property and used to the establishment of a free school for orphans of color of the Faubourg Marigny. So that was her plan. This is 1832. It took a few years for the money and everything to actually come together. But the school was established in 1848 by a group of free men of color. When it first opened, the school had 5 teachers, all free people of color who taught in French and English. Notable instructors included Armand Lanous and Félicie Caillou, who was the widow of course, Caillou, who died in the war in 1863. Tommy Lafon, Aristide Mary, and Arthur Estève were dedicated benefactors of the school. And so here's the board of directors in 1915. We have Walter Cohen, Louis Charbonnet, quite a few very important men within the Creole community in New Orleans. The original school was, as you can see, destroyed in the hurricane of 1915, but it was rebuilt and was taken over by Holy Redeemer Parish, and it became known as the St. Louis School. And so this is the school from 1924. That building was torn down and rebuilt in the 1950s. And then in 1994, it became the Bishop Perry Middle School, named after Bishop Perry, who was the first ordained Black bishop in the state of Louisiana. We also have records for, influential philanthropists. Tommy LaFawn, of course, very well known in New Orleans. With his will, he gave a lot of money to different Catholic organizations, including the Sisters of the Holy Family. And this is the Tommy LaFawn Nursing Home that they were able to build with that money in 1895 in the 7th Ward. And so this is a really nice picture of that building. We also have a lot of records related to individual parishes. For example, this is the annual report for St. Peter Claver from 1922, just a few years after it was established. They gave over 10,000 communions that year. So what's fun about these records is that you can actually track, demographics. You can learn about, education, which schools had parochial schools, the number of Catholics living in different neighborhoods and parishes. And so I find that these reports for the different churches, you can kind of look at them decade by decade and really learn about a community, learn about the different religious societies that were there, how are they spending their money, all that kind of stuff. We have an extensive Catholic newspaper collection in the archives, and this is from when Bishop Ferry was consecrated in 1966. We have Catholic newspapers dating back to the 1840s. All of the Clarion Herald, which was established in the 1960s, is digitized and available online. So, 60 years of newspaper accounts are free and accessible. So we also have a large Catholic school integration, desegregation collection from when Archbishop Rummel was the Archbishop. And so, took the Catholics a little longer to actually integrate, but I eventually did. So how do you access records if you're interested in doing research? We do have a lot of our earliest and oldest records available online that have been scanned and digitized. I know Jari was up very late many nights looking at some of these with all of his work that he's been doing, finding information about our Pope. I'm hoping over the next few months to include those indices I mentioned earlier. We have PDFs on our website, and I'm hoping to get all of those PDFs up that go into the 1830s up on there so that everyone can have access to them and just make more things available. With the grant funding and more things getting scanned, I want to have more of that information up and available on our website as well to just increase accessibility. And then to end, I have just a really cute picture. We have a whole roll of film from the first St. Peter Claver Mardi Gras parade that they posted in 1955. And so this is the little kids in the Mother Goose float. But yeah, it's just cute. So yeah, so that's the Office of Archives and Records. I have a QR code for our website, and you guys can leave.
Okay, Cassandra Will is our second speaker. Cassandra is a native and resident of New Roads, Point Coupee Parish. Will has a Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology from Southern University in Baton Rouge. She is also a graduate of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies here at Xavier with a master's degree in theology. Will has over 30 years of experience in catechetics. She has served as a director of religious education and taught at Catholic schools. Currently, she serves as a consultant for the Office of Black Catholics for the Diocese of Baton Rouge. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Godin. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Okay, I'm going to talk to you about two brothers who came from Point Coupee Parish, Louisiana, and they're called the Plantving Brothers. And both of these brothers were born in Point Coupee Parish. They were born during Reconstruction. Their names are Peter Planving, as we commonly know him, and the other one is John Justin Planving. And so these two brothers were born in a small town called Chenal, Louisiana, which means channel in French. I'm from New Roads, and it's part of the reason for that is because the Mississippi River made an oxbow, and it's like where we are, False River. A lot of people say, well, that's not spelled right. Yes, it is. It's spelled False River. So they were born in that area. Peter was born in 1869, and John was born in 1871. Their parents are Urban John Planving, or Justin Planving rather, and Cecile Bonfait. And so both of these brothers grew up in Pointe-Coupee Parish, and they went to one-room schools. Now, if you can know our history, Black people were not able to finish high school for a number of years. And so even during this time period, these two brothers were picking cotton. And they picked cotton because they wanted to earn a better education that Pointe-Coupee Parish could not provide for them. At this time, you could not get a high school education in Pointe-Coupee Parish or even the city of Baton Rouge. So they would have to go to New Orleans. Their parents died when the older brother was like 14 years old. And so they ended up being raised by a strict Catholic grandmother. There's a book that was written by a Jesuit priest named Father Albert Foley, and it was published around 1955. And the book is called God's Men of Color, and it traces the Black priests here in the United States. And so this has a lot to do with, this has a lot to do with these Planving brothers. And so these two brothers ended up going to New Orleans to finish school. But prior to that, they picked cotton and they also taught school. Yeah, because during that time, if you finished 8th grade, you could teach school. So they taught school, and then they migrated to New Orleans, which probably they had relatives and friends living in New Orleans. They both ended up at Straight University, which has its roots in Dillard University here in New Orleans. And so at this time, Straight University was being financed and missionized by a group called the American Missionary Association. It was a group of Protestant ministers out of New York, and they were helping newly freed slaves to become educated. So they began forming schools and many of the historically Black colleges that you hear about. As you heard in my bio, I'm a graduate of Southern University. And so it is a historically Black college, but its roots are a little bit different. But some of the other colleges like Straight University, Talladega, Tuskegee Institute, which it was known as when I was a child, a lot of these schools were assisted by these people to get started. So the two brothers ended up at Straight University, where their paths started to change. Peter became a Congregationalist minister in that order. They were both raised Catholics. They were both Catholics. And so he married a girl from Darrow, Louisiana named Betty Hamer. And they had 3 children, Jessica, Lena, and Albert Jr. So Peter had a vision that he wanted to open a school for Black children in Pointe-Coupee Parish. So this is a school that he built. After he got his degrees from Straight University, he became a minister, and he changed the spelling of his last name. The name was originally spelled Plantevigne, and a lot of people would have pronounced it Plantevigne or Plantavine. It's Planving. And so he started spelling his name Planving, I guess, to make it more accessible. So he built this school, and it opened around 1900. It was called the Pointe-Coupee Industrial and High School. And so this shows where he was a theology student at Straight University when he was getting his theology degree. This is a class, a picture rather, of some of the children from Pointe-Coupee Industrial and High School around 1901. I met a lady that her mother was one of the students at this school. all the way to the right, if you look at the first row, ones who are seated all the way to the right, the lady at the end, her name is Julia Paul. And the reason that is significant, she was a lady that taught my father when he was growing up. He actually was taught by one of the graduates. Okay, so this is the first school, picture of the school, and this is the first graduating class. That's Professor Planving. He was known as Professor Planving after that. And that's his wife, Betty, who was from Darrow, Louisiana. And these are the three first graduates. And as you can see, the graduates are all what? Women. Because there was a practice in the Black community, and I pointed this out to a sister last summer when I was at Louisville, Kentucky, at the Black Sisters Conference. I said, there was a practice where after slavery, they wanted two things. They wanted their freedom, but they also wanted their children educated. So a lot of the males were put in manual labor. And they would allowed to go to school, but school for Black children was about 2 or 3 months. So when Professor Planving opened his school, it was extended to 8 months, which would make it longer. And so the other 9 months of the year, the Black children would be working in the fields, picking cotton, cutting sugar cane, picking pecans, harvesting soybeans, potatoes. These are some of the crops that grow in Point Parish. But some of the fathers said, no, my daughter is not working in the fields. She's going to go to school. So they wanted the daughters educated. And so they would allow the boys to work in school, and many of the boys resented that, but the fathers would say, no, you're going to make money so your sister can go to school. They didn't want their daughters working as domestics. They didn't want them working as babysitters. They wanted them to get a trade. So these 3 women graduated from the Point Coupee Industrial School. They were the first 3 graduates. Okay. I'm sorry, what did I do? Sharon, I don't fix something right for you. I'm call myself Wilma Flintstone. I'm a baby boomer, so technology is not our first thing. The first button we press, something will go wrong.
That's right.
So I rely on the Gen X and Gen Z. I will admit that in a heartbeat. All right, so at Straight University, this is an industrial class. And as you can see, it has what in it? Who's in the picture? Males. And they're learning a trade because they were going to learn carpentry, also newspaper printing, things like that they could learn and earn a better living than picking cotton, cutting sugar cane. Because the thing was, we're going to educate you so that you can improve your family's life. Okay, the young women, what are they learning to do? So, yes, because that was going to be a big industry, making clothes, working in the garment factories, fashion industry and things like that. So these are the kind of tools that Professor Planving brought to his school, in addition to reading, writing, arithmetic, the sciences, English, French. He brought these kind of things so that they could learn that. All right, now, Professor Planving's school stayed open approximately 3 years. One day he was going to the post office in Oscar, Louisiana. And he was riding on a what? A horse. As he was coming back to his school, the school was a 2-story structure. The family lived on the 2nd floor, the school was on the 1st floor. 2 white men were lying in wait in a cotton field. They ambushed him and the horse. They shot the horse in the head. They shot him in the back of the head. They left the bodies in the road to terrorize the Black community. And the reason was they wanted the school shut down. Because they didn't want Black people to be what? Educated. They wanted them working in manual fields and these sharecroppers, and because a lot of that existed during that time. His murder was hardly investigated at all. The local newspaper, which is the Parkview Banner, didn't even write about it. It was months later when the local sheriff and an attorney from the New Roads area put an ad in the paper to advertise if anybody knew about the murder. People knew, but they were too afraid to say anything. Oral tradition says there were some Black people who witnessed it, but they were too scared that they moved because they didn't want to be lynched, because it is considered a lynching. So his wife was terrorized. And so this is an article, one of many articles that I located because I did my thesis on the Planting brothers for Xavier. And this is one of the articles that talked about Professor Planting's murder. What I found, his murder was recorded in many places. We found an article throughout the United States. We also found one in Canada, and we even found one in German. And it was written in German. My sister, one of my sisters works at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. So I had her to take the article, and someone from the library translated it from German into English for me, and it talked about his murder. It called him a principal, it called him an educator, it even called the school a college, but it was a high school. So it stayed open till roughly around 1904. They tried to run it, but it ended up closing. This is the marriage license of L.A. Planting, and as you can see how he signed his name, and his wife, how she signed her name. And that's from Ascension Parish, because that's where Darrow is. Okay, this is another one showing his murder. There were many, many articles that I was able to locate on his murder. Now, he's buried on the site where the school was. It said that this is 1902. He died in August 1903 on a hot summer day, and this is his burial site. He is buried at Zion Travelers Baptist Church, which is located on Falls River in near New Roads. It's in Oscar, Louisiana. The church brought the site of that property decades ago, I think in the 40s, and they decided to memorialize Professor Planting. So in 2013, the Parkview Historical Society started doing some research. One of their members came across his grave and started to dig into his history. Now, those of us from the Black community knew his history already. We knew about his burial. His school does not exist anymore. The building is no longer there. It was set on fire, from what I understood, and then eventually torn down. So the Parkview Historical Society set up this monument at his grave site. As you can see, it shows his parents' name on here. It shows that the name of him as being the principal of the school. It also shows that, he died, he gave his life for others. And it shows his brother's name. Okay, now his younger brother John remained at Straight College for about 8 months. While he was in New Orleans, the Archbishop at the time was very open to Black men becoming priests. And so Father Planting wrote the Josephites. The Josephites are an order of religious priests here in the United States. They started out as the Mill Hill Fathers. They are in Baltimore, Maryland. They were a group of English priests that came down after slavery. And eventually the American Josephites split from them. And so they traced their lineage to 1893. So there were Josephites in New Orleans at the time. The first Josephite from Louisiana is a man named Pierre Lebeau. He is from Parkview Parish, and he was stationed in New Orleans at the time for a newly opened parish called St. Dominic. And so John Planting was enrolled at Straight University. And then from there, he went to the Josephites, and this is his picture. Okay, you see what he looks like. Okay, so this is Father Planting. He was ordained as a Josephite in 1907. He was the third Black Josephite. He is the first Black Josephite from the state of Louisiana. And he's also the second Black priest, as far as we can find historically, from the state of Louisiana. The first Black priest was a priest named Father Adrian Esnard, but he did not serve here in the United States. He served here in the Congo. He served in the Congo. So this is Father Planting. And as you see, this is how the family spelled their name. All right, this talks about his first mass. He celebrated his first mass, and this is an article on his first mass. This is him. This is from the Josephite Archives. That's Father Planving in the center with his classmates. Now, during this time, the Josephites had a mission band. And what this group of priests were doing, they were going along the eastern seaboard from Wilmington, Delaware, all the way down to the south. And they were doing revivals. Now, you know, we didn't have cameras like we do now, cell phones and pictures and stuff. So he was traveling with one of his classmates named John or J.J. Albert. And J.J. Albert was from Brooklyn, New York. And so the two of them were going and preaching. And Father Planving was doing some of the preaching. Father Albert was doing some of the preaching. And so Father Planving was scheduled to do a revival here in New Orleans at St. Dominic's Parish. However, Father Pierre LeBeau was the pastor at the time. He would have known the Planving brothers, or would have known the family for sure. He apparently told the people Father Planving was coming. The Creoles of that parish got together and went to the Archbishop and told him they did not want that colored priest doing the revival. Father Planving had written his family, his probably his sister-in-law Betty, and her children, other relatives, other friends that he had from New Orleans, that he was coming to do this revival. He got the letter while he was in Mississippi. He was heartbroken. He was devastated that he was not allowed to do this revival. Because of this incident, it started to follow him. There were correspondence between him and the Archbishop of New Orleans, which I think was Archbishop Blink at the time. And they communicated back and forth. He communicated with the Josephite superiors. His superiors did not support him. He got very disgusted with all of this. And he was saying, but I've worked in many of these parishes and I've been really accepted. I've been successful at some of the revivals and all of this. He started to write other dioceses here in the United States. They would not accept him. He wrote the bishop in St. Augustine, Florida. He wrote other bishops throughout the United States. And at this time, you know, we would have had Father Augustus Tolton was the first recognized Black priest in the United States, but there were three prior to him, the three Healy brothers. And so Father Tolton had already passed. The Josephites had already ordained Father Charles Uncle and Father John Dorsey, which Dr. Kathleen Bello, Dr. Kathleen Dorsey Bello, Dr. Bello, stand up. That's one of her relatives. That's her uncle, I think. And so we're proud to have her here at the Institute because she's definitely a descendant of Father John Dorsey. So Father Planving was the third one. So what the classmate did note and what he wrote to the Josephites, he said he noticed this. He noticed there was a distinction that when Father Planving went to the Creole parishes where the people were light-skinned, he was not accepted. And he actually said he's not accepted among the Creoles. Now, considering where he's from, Point Coupee Parish, he would be considered a Creole because many of them spoke Creole, was their primary language. I do not speak Creole. My father did, and his siblings. And if any of you remember this as children, when I'd go to my grandmother's house with my father and his mother, when they started talking Creole, that was our cue to do what? Leave. That's right. Leave the room. Because they were talking grown folk business. So I didn't learn Creole. My mother's father did not want them to learn Creole because he considered it a broken language between English and French. So we didn't learn it. So anyway, Father Planving was not accepted. And his classmates said he noticed that. But he also said he noticed this. When he came to black parishes where the people were darker skinned, they were enthused to have him. He went to a parish in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and they said a colored priest was coming to do a revival. And a white man said, I don't believe that. I don't think a black man can preach or whatever. Father Planvin showed up. He preached. The man said, I was wrong. That was the best sermon I ever heard. So he was accepted and the people wanted him to be their pastor. Eventually, he was going to be assigned here in the Archdiocese of New Orleans and Palmetto, but the bishop refused his assignment. It was refused. So the Josephites ordered him back to Baltimore, where he became the associate pastor of St. Francis Xavier in Baltimore, which is considered their home parish. One of the significant things I found about Father Planvin, he married a man named Thomas Y. Turner and his wife, Laura Elaine Miller. Laura Elaine Miller was not a Catholic. There was a practice at this time that if you were a Catholic marrying a non-Catholic, you couldn't be married in the church. We either married on the steps of the rectory or at the bride's house. So they married at the bride's house. And Thomas Y. Turner is associated with the Confederate Colored Catholics. And this he's written about in Father Cyprian Davis' book, History of Black Catholics in the United States. So when my professor, Father Dr. Cecile Moore, saw this, she was so excited to learn this. And this was one of the significant things about Father Planvin, because one professor had told me, well, Father Planvin didn't do anything to promote Black Catholicism. Yes, he did. He was out, and I proved her wrong. He was outspoken on the Black men and Black Catholics not being accepted. And he did a number of talks about Black Catholics not being accepted. He was also the first Black person to enroll at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. So this is his obituary. He took sick, he developed tuberculosis around 1910. And the result of that is said he had a nervous breakdown because of what he had been through. And he died in 1913, in January 1913. And he's buried in Baltimore. And this is his burial site. And this is where he was born, his date, birth, and death date. This is where he's buried. And if you notice, it says St. Joseph Society, and it says the what section? The colored section. Because many of us who live in Louisiana and have been birth Catholics, I'm a Black Catholic on both sides for generations. This is the only religion I know. I'm not going nowhere. I'm staying in this church till they plant me in the ground. And so we had a Josephite priest, because I come from a Josephite parish in New Roads. And I told him there are 3 or 4 cemeteries in New Roads, 3 Catholic cemeteries rather. And there's one of them where some of my relatives are buried. And I told him that cemetery was segregated. He said, I don't believe that. I said, yes, it is. The whites are in the front, the Blacks are in the back. I learned later there's a middle section. The middle section is for the Creoles. I didn't know that. But then I figured it out. I said, okay, yeah, one of my great grandfathers who founded Mardi Gras at New Roads, I know New Orleans got it, but we're the 3rd oldest Mardi Gras in the state of Louisiana, a man named Jimmy Boudreaux. He was biracial, or what we know as mulatto. And so he's buried in the middle because he was considered a Creole or a person of color. My great grandmother, who was a darker skinned woman, is buried in the back, along with one of my uncles, who was going to become a priest at St. Augustine. And even though St. Augustine was a Josephite parish, he could not join the Josephites. Because at that time period, they were not taking any Black men to be ordained. So after the mess with Father Planvin, the Josephites made a decision not to ordain any more Black men for decades. So the Society of Divine Word took up the cause, built a seminary in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, for Black men. It's called St. Augustine Seminary. That's where my Uncle McKinley was going. However, he was killed. He was accepted, he was hit by a train. He was supposed to go, he was in the springtime, he was killed. He was hit by a train and died later that day, the day he was hit by the train. And even though he was in a Josephite parish, he could not go to the Josephite seminary. This was in the late forties, 1940s. Okay, so this is the cemetery where Father Planving is buried. This is the name of the cemetery, Cathedral Cemetery in Baltimore. And in around 1922, the colored Catholics at that time looked at how the church was opposed to ordaining the Negroes. So they had this is a booklet that they did, and this is Father Planving. He's the poster boy for that. Because after him, this is when all the confusion took place. And so the Society of Divine Word ended up ordaining about 6 Black men around 1934, and many of them served in the Diocese of Lafayette. Okay, this slide right here, this is Julia Paul. And this lady is the lady that was one of the first graduates from the Pointe-Coupee Industrial School. She taught school, she taught my dad when he was a boy. And she died in the 50s, and she's buried in St. Augustine Catholic Church. And on her headstone, her students had put beloved teacher. And so I heard a lot of stories about Miss Julia Paul. She taught in many schools around Pointe-Coupee Parish, but it just goes to show you that the vision Professor Planving had continued. Now, after his school was closed, another high school for Black children was not opened up until 1950, around 1950 or 51. It was called New Rose Colored High School. My father comes from a family of 11 children. The first half, some had to come to New Orleans to finish school. My dad finished school at McKinley High School, and a couple of his siblings in Baton Rouge. And so then the last set finished at New Rose. Some finished from New Rose High, and some finished from what was then called, it was turned into Roosevelt High School, but it's now an elementary school. So this is my story of the Planving brothers and their Creole roots to Pointe-Coupee Parish, Louisiana.
Thank you, Cassandra. All right, next we have Sister Sylvia Thibodeau. Born on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1936, to Paul and Una Thibodeau. Sister Sylvia is the oldest of 8 children. She attended elementary school in her hometown of Breaux Bridge, where she was taught by the Sisters of the Holy Family. She attended Holy Rosary High School in Lafayette, also taught by the Sisters of the Holy Family. She then entered the congregation, receiving her religious training in New Orleans. She earned her undergraduate degree in history and American studies at Seton Hill University in Pennsylvania. She later obtained a graduate degree, in education from Antioch Graduate School of Education in Washington, D.C., and a diploma in spiritual theology from Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, a diploma in spirituality from Regina Mundi in Rome. She taught in several schools administered by the Sisters of the Holy Family, the last in the United States, at Catholic community-controlled schools in Boston. Sister was next assigned to Nigeria, West Africa, where she assisted the Bishop of Benin City in the founding of an indigenous religious order of women. After 18 years, Sister returned to the United States to assume leadership of her own religious order. After completing her term of leadership and a year of reflection, she was then invited by the Archbishop of New Orleans to serve as vicar for the religious. After retiring, she was assigned to work on the cause of canonization for the foundress of the Holy Family Sisters, Ariette DeLille. She is today still serving the church and its people. She states that she is grateful for her almost 70 years of religious life and thanks God for the gift he has given her. Sister Sylvia's presentation is a history of the Order of the Holy Family Sisters and its foundress, Mother Ariette DeLille.
Thank you very much for the privilege of participating in today's event. I'm going to hold my seat since I'm the oldest. My conversation with you this afternoon will be on what I have learned over these many years about the history of the order. Mother Ariette DeLille, free woman of color, founded the Sisters of the Holy Family in 1842. The group first came together in 1836. So formally, they were not recognized until many years later. But Mother Ariette DeLille was a woman of great courage and great faith. That is what motivated her. That is what gave her the courage to establish an order of women, religious women of color during slavery. The fact that that happened is a miracle in itself. In the slave market of the world, the largest slave market, New Orleans, they very quietly came together and established a religious order. Now, it was unusual, it's still something that baffles people, that Ariette DeLille was able to become a sister herself. She was a woman of color. She was not rich. She was not well educated. Because religious life in the United States at that time was for young, white, wealthy women, young women. And she was neither of them. And with little support from church and society, she was able to build her community during very shameful times. The pioneer women who founded the order, all the early women, were women of color. Their relatives, like Ariette, cohabitated with white men. So they were of Afro-Creole origin. Mother DeLille herself was the youngest of 4 children. Her own mother cohabitated with a man named Jean DeLille Sargent, of which a son was born, Jean DeLille Jr. He knew his father. He was close to him. Mother DeLille, we're not sure, though she uses the name DeLille, we have no evidence, documented evidence, that her father was also DeLille. So we're not sure who her father was. We know her mother was Josefa Diaz, a Spaniard woman from Cuba, descendant from Cuba. She came from a very large family, mainly of women who all, as I said, cohabitated with white men and encouraged their daughters to do the same. Mother DeLille's sister, Cecile O'Neill, she has a different last name from Ariette. She was of O'Neill. she cohabitated with a man named Samuel Hart. Of Austrian ancestry, who was living in New Orleans at the time. And she bore 3 or 4 children in that relationship. There is evidence that Mother DeLille herself, and I want to get this out right away, did have 2 children that were died. They died when they were 2 years old. There's no evidence that Mother DeLille herself was in the Osage cohabitating with white men. We have no evidence of that. But we do have some evidence that the children were baptized and buried as paupers on the edge of the cemetery. And which means that at that time, she certainly had no money. And if, in fact, she was in the Osage, she would have had money. The child would have been there. We have no identification of who this gentleman was. It appears that he may have been a seaman who just passed through, got a girl in a report, that story. Maybe he met with her a couple of times and then went on his way. Because we did extensive research trying to find his name. Where he lived, where he was from. The name is Bocno, Bocno, but that's as much as we know. We were never able to find any information about him. That ends that story. And the other information that circulates about Mother DeLille is that the community in its early years owned slaves. Now, we have no information about that. Our extensive research was done by Father Cyprian Davis. And his research indicates that the community did have a slave, but that this woman named Betsy was living with the sisters because she had been abandoned. We own a nursing home, LaFawn Nursing Home. LaFawn Nursing Home started by housing abandoned slaves that the sisters would find on the street, pick them up and take them in and care for them. That, in fact, is the first work of the sisters, caring for the elderly, poor. We have indication that Henriette DeLille did, in her will, name Betsy as her slave, as her woman, and willed her to her brother. Our interpretation of that, based on the work that she did and the other sisters with her, that she wanted to make sure that Betsy was well cared for. So she willed Betsy to her brother, knowing that her brother would probably care for her. Henriette herself, as far as her family was concerned, she was born in a large, complicated family, mainly women. Her great-great-grandmother was a slave and owned by Jean-Claude Dubreuil, who was an engineer in Louisiana and especially here in New Orleans. He built the old Ursuline Fountain and many of the levees in the city. He owned Mother DeLille's great-great grandmother who came from the Gambia, city Gambia, the region around the Gambia and Senegalese. She was herself a Wolof woman, was probably Muslim, her religion would have been Muslim. But she was owned in the Gambia by French colonial people. So she would have been exposed to Catholicism. And that's how we believe that Mother DeLille's family, Catholicism would have been part of her family, even before they came to Louisiana. So they were sold in slavery. So her great-great-grandmother was named Nanette or Mary Ann, was concubine to the slave owner. He bore children with her. He never freed her, neither did he free her children. She worked, continued to work for him, earned enough money, bought her freedom, bought the freedom of her children, and that's the way they were free. The family developed, grew. They were very wealthy with time. They owned property on Orleans Street and many of the houses right there on Orleans Street. With time, ironically, the sister's mother house was on Orleans Street, 717 Orleans Street, the present Bourbon Orleans Hotel. They also purchased the first St. Mary's Academy on Charter Street, which was where the old ballroom was, the ballroom or the place where they bought and sold slaves. And Bernard Diggs, who is one of our first historians, talks about how ironic that was that we purchased the very place where slavery took place, and sort of, according to Diggs, we took away the evil that went on there by the sisters living and praying and educating young people there. That changed the whole history of the place. And the same thing happened with the purchase of the Bourbon, what is now the Bourbon Orleans Hotel. It had a ballroom in the building, and it was the place where young, wealthy white men chose their mistresses at the balls. And we also purchased that facility later on in the 1860s, 70s, as for the school and the mother house. And that remained our home until the middle 1960s. 64, we sold the property and moved to Chicago. The sisters in these early years lived, it was very hard, very challenging, very difficult. They were very poor. Many nights, Diggs, John Bernard Diggs, who wrote the early history of the community, speaks about how many nights they went to bed hungry, that the only thing they had for food was sweet water. People gave them things, people donated things to them, but rather than keep it for themselves, they shared what they had with those who were poorer than themselves. So life was very, very difficult for the early women. They struggled, but they never gave up. They had very little help from both church and society. They lived their lives very clandestinely, very quietly, and very hidden, yet they were able to do so much for so many with so little. And that's pretty much our story today. The sisters, they began to establish schools. How were they educated? Well, we talked about Madame Pougon, who started a school very early, and Henriette and Juliette, the early women, Juliette Godin and Josephine Charles, were students at that school. That was their early years of education. Beyond that, we don't know what other educational experiences they had, but it was certainly enough to lead them into establishing schools. The first school outside of St. Mary's Academy was St. John of Arc, the elementary school there. It was the first school that they established moving out of the Arlene Street or the French Quarters. From there, they established a school in Baton Rouge, elementary school, which lasted until last year. Our sisters withdrew from the school last year. And in many cases, wherever we established a school, we were the first face of the church in that community. In Baton Rouge, the sisters went there before the clergy, before the Josephites established a church there. The nuns were there. Same thing in my home, a parish. They established a school in 1923 before the Josephite priests came there. So the sisters were, in the Opelousas was the same thing. We established a school, Holy Ghost School in Opelousas, and we were there before the clergy. So church does not agree to allow women to be canonized, but we were functioning as clerics in many ways way before they came. The clergy, male clergy, came into the parishes. There was a split in the community. Josephine Charles, this is after Mother DeLille's death. She died in 1862, the year before the Union Army took over. The same year, actually, before the Union Army took over New Orleans. She died of tuberculosis. And her friend, her close friend, Juliette Godin, became the superior of the order. Juliette lived until 1888. She lived a very long time. And there was a split in the order at that time, most notably over a slave named Chloe Pavall, who entered the order. Chloe had been a slave of the Archbishop of New Orleans, and this brought a conflict in the community. Juliette and some members argued that the admission of a freed slave would forever mark the community as subservient, and Juliette did not want that. She did not want the sisters to be cooks and cleaners and the Jews subservient were housekeepers. Ironically, that became a work for many years. Sisters were housekeepers to the Archbishop, and they worked in the seminary, caring for seminaries, cooking for seminaries, until Archbishop Hammond left the Archdiocese. So that was very definitely a part of the work. So Josephine, though, wanted to admit the slave It caused a split. Juliet moved to another house. Pierre Rosalon rented a house for Josephine and the other sisters. And this remained until the purchase of Arlene Street, when they were reunited. And Juliet came back and joined the community, and they were reunited. The reason for their split, however, continued. Chloe continued to be the housekeeper to the Archbishop, and she died in old age, caring for the orphans. You know, we had 2 orphanages. We had St. John Birchman for girls and La Fawn Boys Home for the boys. St. John originally started on Bourbon and Orleans, but the building got so bad conditions that a group of lay faithful Catholics got together. They were called the Willing Workers. They got together, raised money, and built what is now the St. John Birchman. It is now a daycare, and it's the repository for our archives now. It's the building across from Dillard University. It's our oldest building, our oldest property that we still own. The other orphanage was on Chef Highway. It was the girls' home, which was in existence, the building was, until Katrina, and that was destroyed. The community, after Mother DeLille's death in 1862, dwindled down to 12 members. There were only 12 members that remained. It was a difficult time. The war was raging, and the ministries were not bringing in much of resources for the community to thrive. The first non-Louisiana member to join the order was a woman named Suzanne Navarre from Boston. They were no more than 12 then, and Suzanne was one of the members. They remained that way for a number of years after Mother DeLille's death. She was an inspiration to the order. They saw her as the life of the community. The church hardly recognized the order. We were not mentioned in the directory of the Archdiocese until the late 1890s, before we were mentioned at all in the directory. And when we were mentioned as the Sisters of Charity, color. Next to this is, it didn't end that way. The community began to grow. They began to admit orders in St. Mary's. The school blossomed. Some of the young women who attended St. Mary's after finishing high school joined the order. Our congregation grew to 300 at our peak. We were 300. We opened schools throughout Louisiana and beyond, Florida, California, Washington, D.C., Belize, Central America at the turn of the century. We established many schools in Belize. We, in the 1970s, late 70s, we went to Africa and helped to establish a religious order, which is thriving, and also have come to help us our community is certainly decreasing, and we are blessed to have these young women volunteer to come and serve our order. And it's the full circle. Mother DeLille's great-grandmother came from Africa. We went back to Africa to help establish an order, and now that order is helping us. So it's a beautiful story. It's a wonderful story. We are at declining times. We only have 50 sisters remaining. Most of them are in the nursing home and are not very active anymore. Our mission or our ministry is primarily prayer. We still have St. Mary's Academy, and it is thriving. It's doing very well. We still have Laton Nursing Home, which is struggling. And we ask for your prayers for that. You do know it's the oldest continuous nursing home in the country. And right now it's going through some challenging times. Our goal is to keep it going and to keep these ministries alive as long as we are able to. And our hope is that we continue to touch the lives of people, that we keep our mission alive, and that we have touched the lives of as many people as possible, and who are themselves carrying out the mission as Mother Juanita told you. This year, the year 2025, our community will be 187 years. We've been believing in God, hoping in God, and loving God. Thank you.
Mr. Thibodeau, I would like you to tell the audience that they have received a grant. Please tell them that.
Great.
We have a very extensive archive. It's very large. And our archive was in the Mother House. The Mother House is very old now. It's in need of great repairs. So we had to move our archive from the Mother House to St. John Birchman Manor, where, you know, the orphanage for girls, the one across from Dillard University. And in the process of moving the archives, we thought about, you know, we need to digitize our archive. We need to be more modern. We need to find a way to preserve our documents. We went through Katrina and lost many of the old documents. We have, our archive have an extensive library that dates back to the 17th and 18th century. The books were brought to the sisters in the early years of their foundation from France. Etienne Roselon, their spiritual guide, whenever he made a trip to France, he brought one or two books from Lyon for the sisters, and the books are all in French. There, we still have those books, thank God. And we have the early Bible that they used during that time. We still have that. Well, that was all in danger from the problems at the Mother House, the leakage in the roof. the windows are leaking. So, one day when our superior was away, I called her and I told her what was going on, and I said, the books are getting all wet, we need to move them. And she said, well, better now than never, please go ahead and move them. I took advantage of the fact that she was away. And I sort of exaggerated the leakage, but I just knew they needed to be moved. And the sensible place, I thought, was St. John Birchman Manor, because it's our oldest facility. And it seems to make sense that our documents would rest in the oldest facility we own. Fast forward to last year, the beginning of this year, Morgan State University and HBCU in Maryland is doing research on early Black educators. And in their research, the first early Black educator that popped up was Mother Oniet Jalil. So they called us and wanted to meet with us and do some research in our archives. And we allowed them to come and invited them, and they came. And of course, not all documents are open. Some of the documents of early history connected with the canonization process is not open to the public. So we allowed them to do research on our schools, all our early schools, and the philosophy of the schools. And so they were very happy and said that, is there anything we can do for you? And I said, well, we would love to digitize our archives so that we can preserve them long after we're here. And they agreed. They said that they would write a grant. And so we talked about it and we agreed. And we came up with a name for the grant, Our Sacred Story. And it was submitted to the National Endowment for Humanities. And May 31st, it was approved. There were 260 applicants. Out of the 260, 23 were approved, and we were one of them. So Morgan State is still working with us. They are trained historians and archivists, and they have been coming at least 3 visits so far, organizing our documents for digitization. So that's our next big project. And of course, you know, the number one project is the canonization of Mother Jalil. We certainly encourage you to pray that will happen. We have an alleged miracle right now that's being reviewed. The miracle is a young woman from Little Rock. She's from New Orleans, but accident happened in Little Rock, Arkansas. She had an aneurysm. She was declared practically dead. Her organs had shut down, and the doctors were certain she would not survive. Well, her mother had great devotion to Mother Jalil, and so did her grandmother, so did all the other members of the family. They knew the sisters. They called for prayers, and we all prayed, and the young woman recovered. She It took a while. She finished graduate school. She works for Homeland Security. She's doing quite well. Just recently, she was examined by a neurologist and she's thriving. So that miracle is being reviewed in Rome, and we hope that something will come of that, and that by God's will, she will be declared, she is venerable. She was declared venerable in 2010. But Rome moves very slowly. And for several years, we didn't have a postulator. Postulator is like an advocate, like a lawyer who advocates for your cause to the Vatican. And we didn't have one until 2023. And I went to Rome and advocated for an advocate. And we did get one, a young man who speaks English. And he is working very hard. He has Mother Lang's cause, whom we are praying also will be canonized. He has Cardinal Utunga, the first African cardinal, who is up for the canonization. So he's very well known, and he's very active, and we're praying that he will move our cause. That's where we are. Thank you.
Okay, just one moment. Okay, we're going to continue with our last speaker.
That's all.
Jari C, excuse me, Jari C. Honorat, a certified genealogist, is a New Orleans native and proud Louisiana Creole with roots dating back more than 2 centuries along Bayou Lafourche and the German Acadian coast. He is a graduate of St. Augustine High School and Tulane University. He works as family historian at the Williams Research Center of the Historic New Orleans Collection. In addition, he does historical and genealogical research professionally, including previous work for the television production Finding Your Roots, We'll Meet Again, and the Georgetown Memory Project. In addition, he is trustee of the Board of Certification of Genealogists, a board member of the Louisiana Historical Society, and the Genealogical Research Society of New Orleans. He also shares his findings as one of the contributing writers on creolegen.org, which is a blog. And the title is The Creole Roots of Pope Leo XIV.
Well, good afternoon. I have a lot of information to cover.
Sorry.
I thought my mouth was speaking up. There's a lot of information to cover, but I will try to get through it quickly because we've had a long afternoon already. As you all have probably seen on television or read in any number of newspapers, I uncovered the very same day that our new Holy Father was elected, that he has very deep New Orleans roots. And so we're just going to give an overview of those roots today. It would be almost impossible to present each and every facet of his ancestors, like it would be difficult to present each and every facet of our own family histories in the short time that we have together. I just wanted to start this talk, since our theme is Catholicism, it is the faith, by highlighting my family church, which is St. Augustine Church in a little bitty place that I don't think any of you have ever heard of, called Clarksville, Louisiana. Because you guys are the bad ladies. But it was built, the original church, because we still call the 1949 building the new church, Louisiana, right? But the original church was built in 1889 on land that was donated by my third great grandfather and one of his brothers, both of whom had been enslaved up through the Civil War. And we have one religious woman vocation from Clarksville, Sister Thaddeus Condall, who was my cousin. So I always like to start presentations with this definition. I won't bore you by reading it verbatim, but it comes from the Board for Certification of Genealogists. And you'll see several key terms that have been highlighted in gold. And in particular, they're the words relationships and identity. Whenever we pursue any kind of genealogical research, those are some of the primary research questions, and we should always start out with a very clear and concise research question, questions of relationship and identity. In fact, in the 1990s, Don Devine, who was a leading figure in the field, he said that basically you could define genealogy as just that, as studying relationships, either the genetic links or the legal links between two or more people, and identity being all of the characteristics and the context that help us to distinguish one person from another. Now, of course, we get to what you all really want to hear about, which is the Holy Father. But even that, just think of how abruptly his election to the papacy involved a shift in identity. A man who was born Robert Francis Prevost, father Robert Francis Prevost, later Cardinal Prevost, in 1955 in Chicago. The question that he was asked after accepting the papacy was, by what name will you be called? By what name will you take? And when the announcement is made famously on the balcony at the Vatican, there's this expression, qui sibi nomen imposuit, he takes upon himself the name. And of course, we know that he selected the name Leo XIV. Assumptions. The one thing we should never do as researchers, historians, genealogists, whatever, is work off of assumptions. We can take some educated guesses, but of course, we have to vet those guesses. We have to question and probe at those theories. And once, I made my initial findings, they're a lot more sense than public, everybody and their mom in them started running up and down the street on Facebook, on Twitter, on everything. My sister's a Prevost, my mom is a Prevost, I went to St. Albans some Prevost. My nan went out with a guy at autograph. Listen, I even had journalists who assumed that was what interested me in this whole story, and it wasn't. Because of the work that I do, I know that Prevost or Prévost is an incredibly common French surname. Now, granted, Prevost is in this country most numerous. There are more people with that surname first in Texas, then Louisiana, then California. And we're not surprised by that. We probably would put Louisiana first, but we know by way of Dr. Godin's introduction earlier that Texas, California, and then another one would be Illinois, or some of the outlook destinations of a lot of our migrations from Louisiana. So not surprising that those states lead the country in terms of the number of prevos. It actually occurs most frequently, given the overall population, 1 in about 8,700 here in Louisiana, and 1 in about 9,000 in Vermont. Now, of course, we know that there's probably tangential, if any, links between the Vermont prevos and the Louisiana prevos, but that's because both of these areas have big French or Francophone populations. So no, it's not the name Prevost that led me to do this research. And if you had assumed, and I'm saying this, so I want you all to go and evangelize this, it is not Prevost. I don't care if your name ends with Prevost. She's not related to Pope, at least not the Prevost line. And I'm gonna tell you why. We talk about questions of identity, right? This is the birth certificate for Louis Marius Prevost, born in 1920 in Chicago. This certificate tells us that his father was Jean Prevost, his mother was Suzanne Fabre, that they were both born in France. One of the things that we know not to do is to take any one source, any one document as gospel. What we do is we make an assemblage of records or sources, and then we compare them, okay? This is the birth certificate for the Holy Father's uncle, his only paternal uncle, John Prevost, who was born 3 years earlier in 1917 in Lackawanna, New York. Okay, so we got a Chicago family that is going to Lackawanna, New York, which is right outside of Buffalo, back to Chicago. Already, our antennae should be up because there's something going on here. But nonetheless, this record also tells us that the dad was Jean Prevost, a foreign language teacher, a foreign language instructor, and the mother was Suzanne Fabre, or the best they could get out of Fabre in Lackawanna, New York, was Fibra. But in any event, these records would tend to agree. The problem is, prior to this time, or prior really to the 1940, 1950 censuses, we don't really find any documentation of the grandfather, of the paternal grandfather, a man named John Prevost, Professor John Prevost. He dies under that name in 1960. His death certificate records that name. You see him here in the 1950 census with his son John, who followed him into the pursuit of teaching language. The Holy Father's dad was a school superintendent, also an educator. But prior to, again, say the 1940s, 1930s at the earliest, we don't find these people under the surname of Prevost. Something that should stand out for you is that both in the 1950 census and on his civil death record, you see a transcript of it here from Family Search, the birthplace is not France, as we observed in the two birth certificates for his sons, is what? Italy. And in fact, this is the only direct piece of evidence that links the individual known as John R. Prevost or John Rigatano Prevost to his actual birth name, which was Salvatore Giovanni Rigatano from Sicily. So this family that we have all, that the world has come to know as Prevost by way of its most famous member now, the Holy Father, as Prevost, if you go back just to the year 1970, just barely, 100, 105, 108 years ago, whatever, they weren't Prevost at all. They were Rigatano. This should be a lesson to all of us. Don't assume. I can't tell you how many times at my Creole conferences and our workshops and all, well, my mom was a Bonnaroo. She told me, I know you were Bonnaroo. Why is it not saying Bonnaroo? Calm down. You have to follow the research wherever it leads you. Not where you want it to go or not where you think it should go. Why did this name change take place around the year 1917? Well, there's some corn there. We like to hunt up corn. Anybody grew up with that sort of thing? The professor, known as John Prevost in later decades, who began his career as Giovanni Rigatano. This is an advertisement for him from the newspaper. He was a teacher of Italian, French, Spanish, and other languages. He was caught up in a love triangle. Yes, the Holy Father's paternal grandparents were caught up in a love triangle in 1917 in Illinois. Professor Rigatano, later Professor Prevost, was married to a woman of his own age named Daisy Hughes, who was originally from Iowa. However, another foreign language instructor who was 20 years his junior by the name of Suzanne, not Fabre, but Suzanne Fontaine, caught his eye and they formed a relationship. His wife discovered this and she blasted it to the media. And this is just one of many newspaper articles from that time highlighting their relationship and what they dubbed again in that day a love triangle. These articles all went to press in March of 1917. We know if you go back to the birth certificate for the Holy Father's uncle, John Prevost, that he was born in July of 1917. And so within a few months of all of this coming to light, they disappeared from Illinois, emerged in upstate New York as Prevost and have been Prevost ever since. Okay. When there are people mostly closer to my age bracket, more than many of you attendees, who say, how is that possible? Weren't there records? You have to remember, this is an era when photo identification was not commonplace. This predates by almost 2 decades the Social Security system. And so it was very much possible to simply assume the identity that you presented, the identity that you gave people. Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna tell you. Now, I'll tell you, having worked on a lot of these cases where people assume different surnames, sometimes we can never figure it out. We never know why they take a particular name. But in this case, that grandmother, so that woman who was 20 years younger than the professor, who essentially pulled him out of his legitimate marriage, Suzanne Louise Marie Fontaine, not Fabre, but Fontaine, was born in 1894 in France. And you see here that her mother's maiden name was Prévost. And so when they sort of conspired to create this new identity for themselves, they didn't just pick a random name out of a hat. They went with what was indeed a family surname back in France, but it's not the patrilineal surname that most of us would have expected. So that's just a quick sort of mini case study as to one of these questions of identity. Here's another. You all may have seen these pictures before. These are the maternal grandparents of Pope Leo. On the left, you have his grandfather, Joseph Naval Martinez, and on the right, his grandmother, Louise Paquier. These individuals were married here in New Orleans in 1887 at Our Lady of the Sacred Heart. Most of you, especially if you were reared in the 7th Ward, you know Our Lady of the Sacred Heart on St. Bernard Avenue, just a few blocks down from Corpus Christi. However, in that era and up until the hurricane of 1915, Our Lady of the Sacred Heart was located at Annette and Claiborne. The site that is now, or that until recently was Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, most people know it in recent years because it was a commodity distribution site right across from the artifact. That was the site of St. Boniface, which was another church in that community. These individuals were from New Orleans, lived in New Orleans, but at some point between 1910, the last census, we find them enumerated in here in New Orleans, and 1911, when the Holy Father's mother was born, she was the last of the daughters in her family. They migrated to New York. These are 4 of their 6 daughters who lived to adulthood. There are another 2 who became religious sisters. One became a Sister of Mercy, and the other became, I think, one of the Servants of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or BVM sisters, which is their postnomial. The lady who is second from the left is Mildred Agnes Martinez. That's the mother of Pope Leo.
Then white.
You will notice that following migration to Chicago in the 1940 census at the very top, 1930 census below it, and the 1920 census, Joseph Novell Martinez, who worked as a cigar maker, and his wife and his many daughters, his 6 daughters, their racial identification is consistently listed as white in Chicago. It is also listed as white in this census, which is the last one in which they appear in New Orleans. This census was taken in the spring of 1910 here in New Orleans. And at the time, they were actually renting in the Upper Puntalva building. If you don't know, the Upper Puntalva building would be the one on the far left side of this picture in the French Quarter. A very multilingual, multi-ethnic community there in the French Quarter. As you might imagine, you have Italians, or to be specific, Sicilians. You always got to make that distinction. You have people from, you really do. You have people from Australia, you have Germans, you have people from Mexico who are Spanish speakers. You have even more Italians, and then you have Maltese. And then somehow, some way, you have Joseph N. Martinez, who is listed as a native of Santo Domingo, which we know should probably be Saint Domingue, but it's just commonplace even in textbooks in the US, even amongst professors, that they refer to Saint Domingue, present-day Republic of Haiti, as Santo Domingo, which is actually the other side of the island, which is now the Dominican Republic. So that era is commonplace. But penciled in above both his birthplace and that of his father is Maltese. And one has to wonder whether this was an attempt to maybe explain away a less than completely white appearance. You have to wonder whether it was just a way of sort of obfuscating, ancestral origins. You wonder whether even the enumerator got confused, because there was an actual Maltese household about 3 doors away. We just never know. But in any event, we know that they're not Maltese. In fact, if you go to the census just before this one in 1900, they were living in the 1900 block of Purr Street, North Purr Street, just a few doors from Claiborne Avenue. This house is no longer standing, and they are clearly listed as people of color. His birthplace is again listed as Haiti, but he is not of Haitian extraction per se. He was born in Haiti, listed as an American citizen, but his parents were both born in Louisiana. In fact, all 4 of Pope Leo's maternal great-grandparents were born here in New Orleans. Likewise, as far back even as the 1870 census, both of his grandparents as children, Novell or Joseph Novell Martinez and Louise Baquier, are listed in New Orleans in the 7th Ward neighborhood as either Black or mulatto. His maternal great grandfather, Jacques Martinez, was a lifelong tailor. That was his career throughout his lifetime. And on the other side, Louise's father, Ferdinand David or David Baquier, not Baquet, as in our well-known family of restaurateurs, but Baquier, Bacquie with the accent U, a family that has origins in Guadeloupe. He was a shoemaker. That was his profession. Ferdinand David Baquier and his wife, Eugenie Grombois, were married at, I believe, Annunciation Church. It's all starting to run together in my mind. But his father was born at Pointe-à-Pitre in Guadeloupe, and his mother was from New Orleans. Louise, I should tell you that Joseph Novell Martinez, the Holy Father's grandfather, was one of 4 children. There was a sister, Adele, who married Ernest Ruzon, who migrated to Chicago, and her family, has long since entered into, shall we say, the white world. There's a brother, Girard, who also married a Ruzon. He and his wife also followed that same path to Chicago. The eldest brother, Michel Martinez, he stayed here in New Orleans and married here. Most of his children moved to Southern California. And they likewise took that path of merging into the white world. He did have at least one son, Mitchell. So you see the Americanization of Michelle becomes Mitchell Martinez, who stayed here. He had another daughter who married a Bagneris or Bonaris, who stayed here. And there are some branches of her family that remain here. One of the great granddaughters of Michelle Martinez is Miss Ellen Dion Martinez Alvarez, who lives in New Orleans East, and you all may have seen her featured in the Times-Picayune story on this past Sunday. Now, on the other side, the Bacquier side, the Holy Father's grandmother, Louise Bacquier, had only one sister, Victoria Bacquier, who married Gratien or Frank, he went by Frank, he was a barber, Flot or Flo. And they had one daughter, Eugenie, named for her mother, Eugenie Flot Darensburg, who had a daughter, Una Darensburg, who married Moore. And her son is the gentleman sitting here, Mr. Malcolm Moore. Wait a minute. So Mr. Moore, who lives out in Destrehan, he was also featured in that article in Sunday's Times-Picayune, because like Miss Ellen Martinez on the other side, he is also a second cousin once removed to Pope Leo. So these, everybody's saying, oh, I'm Ken. Miss Ellen on the Martinez side, Mr. Moore and his surviving brothers are among the the closest New Orleans relatives we have of Pope Leo. So I'm glad that you were able to come and join us today. Just a few years before that 1870 census, in 1861, as was required from the 1840s all the way up through the 1860s, free people of color in New Orleans at the mayor's office or in rural parishes, by statute, they were to go to the parish judge and in a sense, enroll themselves, register as free persons of color entitled to remain in the state. Their names were recorded, their complexions, their height, their ages, their occupations, their birthplaces, and some proof of their freedom. In many cases, they would offer, say, a baptismal certificate. Sarah talked about that earlier, where their status as free at the time of baptism or being freed upon baptism was noted, or they would present a copy of an act of manumission, passed before some notary, or lastly, they would use the testimony of, quote, a reputable white person or persons in the community. In this case, Jacques Antonio Martinez and his family, they were registered upon the testimony of two individuals taken by one of the justices of the peace. They also had to pay a fee of 50 cents per person in order to register. You can imagine the insult that this was to Jacques Martinez and to his wife, Rosa Ramos, whose family had been here for at least 100 years prior to the time that the man who was mayor of the city even arrived in New Orleans. They had to go and attest to the fact that they were lawfully in this state. Because of this indignity and a lot of indignities that really became commonplace in the 1850s, 1860s, as we're leading up to the Civil War, the Dred Scott decision, the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, the complete banning of manumission of enslaved people in Louisiana in 1857, Jacques Martinez and his family, along with his sister and other relatives that I'll mention later, they actually choose at some point between 1861 and 1863 to attempt a new life for themselves in Haiti. They moved to Port-au-Prince, and it's there in 1864 that the last of their children, Joseph Naval, Pope Leo's grandfather, was born. They come back in February of 1866. This is very common. You have people who are attempting to make lives for themselves in Haiti. Many go to France. Others go to Mexico, where there were several colonies of Louisiana free people of color. And we'll be getting a book on that soon by way of our esteemed Mary Gaiman. And Mother DeLille has close relatives who made that migration to Mexico as well. But in the case of the Martinez family, they chose Haiti and stayed for anywhere between, say, 2 to 4 years before returning. So just to give you sort of a visual of the Pope's family, this is not a complete tree. We could go on and on with certain particular lines, but this is an overview of his family. The surnames that you'll find, of course, are Martinez, you have Baquier, you have Ramos, there is Panquanet. In fact, one of his ancestors, Pierre Denis Panquanet, was the sexton or sacristan at the cathedral in the latter part of the 18th century. You have Rayo, R-T-A-U-X, and a name that we all know is Lamel. So his Louise Lacquier's paternal grandmother was Celeste Lamel, and her family, of course, has roots in St. Landry Parish, as do many people. And so just a few weeks ago, Suzanne Malvo, the journalist, Judge Ivan Lamel, and several other Lamel descendants, they all gathered to sort of celebrate his connection to the Holy Father. Among the individuals on this chart, you have several individuals who are, of course, free people of color. You have some who were white, and you have others like Julianne, the mother of Patiche, like Marie-Louise and her daughter Marie-Jeanne or Jeannette Glapion, and Julianne Montroy's mother, Marie-Louise, who were born enslaved. And I can't emphasize that enough, that, you know, it's only perhaps by, you know, in divine planning that we have a Holy Father, the first from America, who shares in having ancestors who were enslaved. And recently enslaved, as we'll talk about in a minute. This is the manifest when they returned to New Orleans from Haiti in 1866. All right, everybody knows this scene, right? Everybody knows that this is our historic St. Louis Cemetery #2 along Claiborne Avenue. Cemeteries, as we know, are wonderful artifacts, and in many cases, as with the Holy Father's family, other than the sacramental registers, which preserve all of our histories that Sarah's responsible for caring for, we don't have a lot of physical structures, surviving physical structures that are linked to his history, but we do have our historic cemeteries. And one of the steps that a lot of people neglect to take when researching their family histories is to determine, if possible, where they are buried. Because we know then and now, we tend to bury our loved ones amongst other loved ones, among people we care about. Neighbors, people who are in the same line of work, people from the neighborhood, as well as, of course, blood relations. And one of the things that you will notice in the burial certificate for Jacques Martinez, as well as for his mother about 21 years earlier, so this is 1891 and then 1870, is that they're buried in the same location. They're both buried in vault number 36 of the base of the, so this is a wall vault, not a tomb, a wall vault, in the Bienville Alley, close to Robertson, on the 3rd range. So when you're counting, you go 1 which would be the ground level, 2, 3, and then 4, although usually 4 is now 3 because of the sinkage that's happened in the cemeteries. But anyway, the 3rd range on the Bienville Alley is where they are buried. Knowing this information, do you think it's just coincidental that these 2 generations of this family are buried in the same wall vault? No. When you go to either visit that site, or if you check the New Orleans Cemetery Database, which is a free resource of the Historic New Orleans Collection, you get it online for St. Louis 1 and St. Louis 2, you will very quickly come to realize that this vault, the sort of principal person or earliest burial there is for a woman named Marie Bourret. Marie Bourret, who dies in her 70s in 1848, and she's a native of Saint-Marc on Haiti, now on the island of Haiti. And so then our research focus sort of shifts, and what's the question we want to find out? Who is this Marie Bourret, right? Why are these people buried in her tomb? Well, we get the answer to that relatively quickly. we find that the person who attested to the death of Marie Barrette in 1848 was Jacques Martinez. And he states that this elderly woman, I believe she was 77 in 1848, was his grandmother. His grandmother. So, and because we know a great deal about his paternal family, the Martinez and the Concordes and the Castells and everything, maternal grandmother. So we think that that's a great, we think that that's a great sort of document that encapsulates the relationships for us. But we don't stop there. We want to know more about this Marie Barrette, this woman who we know comes from Saint Marc at some point to New Orleans. Well, how do we do that? One of the steps we can take, it's sort of a unique set of records, I think Sarah would agree, is that we have what we call the ownership books for the St. Louis cemeteries. And they are sort of a compilation of entries for burials that took place in the different tombs or vaults. And one of the things I noticed is that almost everyone interred in that vault, which belonged to Marie Barrette, was a Martinez, or Cadenet, I presume, our daughter, with just really two exceptions. There is an Artemise Germain who died in 1875, and a Pierre Germain who was interred, I believe, in 1877. That was interesting, that all of these family members, starting in, the 1840s, all the way through, I see Mrs. Jacques Martinez there in 1904, so you got a period of like 50, 60 years, but there are these two individuals, a couple, Artemise and Pierre Germain. So our research focus sort of shifts again, and it becomes, who are Pierre and Artemise Germain? Well, that name wasn't entirely unfamiliar to us, because when the Martinezes returned from Haiti in 1866, there was a P. Germain Delivre, you see it at the bottom, Delivre, and Artemise Delivre, people of comparable age, again, likely a couple, who migrated back from Haiti with them. We also you'd find that when the Martinezes registered as free people of color entitled to remain in the state in May of 1861, likewise, this Pierre Germain alias Delivre also appeared before the mayor's office on the very same day. So there's clearly a connection between these individuals. And there it is there. You see that we have the Martinezes, and then also in May of 1861, we have Delivre, alias Pierre Germain, who's 59, he's a lifelong butcher, and his birthplace is Haiti, is Saint-Domingue. So this gets us closer to our goal, which is to find out just who was this Marie Barrette. Unlike the Martinezes, who were recorded upon the affidavit of reputable white citizens, he provides as proof of his free status a notarial act. He provides his act of manumission, which was passed before Hughes Pettislow, very popular notary then, in 1834. And we see that act was executed by Marie Barrette, FWC, free woman of color. So here's our primary target, our primary research target, Marie Barrette, manumitting this Haitian-born fellow who seems to just do so much in common with the Martinez family. So this is the actual act of manumission for Delivre, alias Pierre Germain. Delivre, if you've ever worked on enslaved people, oftentimes they carry these four names that you don't find in the white community, in the mainstream or freeborn community. It was, I guess you could say, considered sort of cute, sort of quaint to name them things like delivery, which means, delivered or fast. In the same sense that in the English speaking world, you find classical names that are given to enslaved people like Emperor or Venus or Mercury or Jupiter. Names that these slaveholding families dare not give to their kids, but they give it to the enslaved people almost in the same manner in which we probably give a cute or quaint name to a pet. But anyway, Delivré, who takes on the identity of Pierre Germain, he's manumitted in 1834 by Marie Barrette, a femme de couleur libre, a free woman of color. We don't stop there, though. In this era, individuals seeking to manumit enslaved people had to appear before the parish police jury. If you know anything about parishes outside of Louisiana, the police jury is the most common form of government, right? I got my attorney friend. And the police jury has no police function. It's not a bunch of cops sitting around. That actually comes from the fact that one of their major tasks in the antebellum period was to police the parish for runaway slaves, or the police for insurrections. But in any event, that's an old form of government that we had in Orleans Parish at one point. And so when Marie Barrette appeared before the police jury, a few months before the act was actually executed, she stated to the police jury that she wanted to free her enslaved person, Delivré, son nephew. Son nephew. Anybody knows what that means? Her nephew. So do you see how pursuing what some people might have said, oh, that's tangential, you don't do that. Who even told you to go look in the, who cares about all the people who are buried in the tomb? No, we find now that this is a close family connection. So then, knowing that she is manumitting this young man at the time, 1833, 1834, who is her nephew, then the question becomes, well, is that your nephew? How's that your nephew? He's got to be either your brother's child, your sister's child, it's got to be somebody's child. Well, and wherever we find that nephew's parent or parents, we will find our Marie. And so, as we do with our enslaved ancestors, something I hope most of you have done or attempted to do, we work back sort of the chain of title. We work back this enslaved man, Delivré, to the earliest possible point. And we see that Marie Barrette, his aunt, we know now, acquired him a few years earlier in 1829 from Rose Tagrin. Rose Tagrin inherited her from her daughter, who predeceased her without heirs. And Charlotte Tagrin acquired him in 1818 from this woman by the name of Anne Sophie Janton, the widow Barrette, or widow Barrette, who is from where? Saint-Domingue, who was from Haiti, and who was the widow by first marriage of Antoine Germain Cadenet, which is the name that Marie's daughter carried. And so we've worked Delivré back to 1818, and it states in the record that he was born on the island of Saint-Domingue in the possession of his Anne Sophie Janton, who is the widow Barrette or widow Barrette. And so it's quite likely that if that is where we find this enslaved nephew, and you see here that it says he was one of the slaves from Saint-Domingue, born on her plantation in Antala, then it's very likely that that is where we would find our Marie as well. And sure enough, we do. Just a few months before she disposes of Delivré, sells him because she's in the process of moving to France, where she lives the remainder of her life, she manumits a mulatto's slave by the name of Marie. This is our Marie, also previously owned by Anne Sophie Janton, the widow Barrette. And you see here in her petition to, prior to the police jury, you had to appear before the parish judge who gave permission to pursue manumission, being the whole possession of your petitioner. Strange to talk of a human being that way, but the whole possession, meaning that entirely owned by her, not co-inherited with anyone else. That possession began on the island of Hispaniola, where the slave was born. One of the things that had to be done before Marie, the great grandmother of Pope Leo, could be manumitted from slavery, is that notice had to be posted, legal notice had to be posted for 40 days by the sheriff in the French and English languages, the predominant languages then, inviting anyone who had opposition to her manumission to bring that opposition forward. And so just think of that period of 40 days. And not to get too theological, but we know the theological, background of 40 days, that this woman, Marie, who has already made her way from one colony as an enslaved person to Louisiana as an enslaved person, managed somehow, some way to remain with her daughter, with at least one of her nephews. She waits for this 40-day period to determine whether anybody would oppose her manumission in 1818. And fortunately, no one did. But it's just very, very telling that her great grandson has been elevated to the papacy, is the 266th successor of St. Peter. And with this whole sort of convoluted story of race and of enslavement and of freedom and of shifting identities, the one scriptural passage that constantly comes to mind for me, I know it'll resonate with you all, is the one that says the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And for those of us, I think most of us Creole Louisiana Catholics, we know that this is the rock, this is Peter, upon which we're built. And so in a very real way, the stone they rejected has become the cornerstone. Thank you all very much.
Would you like to join us? It's up to you. It is 4 p.m. So I believe that we would like to take a few minutes for questions. Even though it is 4 p.m. Can we take a few minutes for questions? Any questions? Yes. Does the Pope have a devotion to a saint?
What a very good question. I met Pope Leo. He was superior of the Augustinians. Saint Augustine, at Saint Augustine High School, his name for, he is an Augustinian. And that means that his devotion is primarily to Saint Augustine.
Yeah.
So that's a very good question. And I'm sure he has devotion to other saints, but primarily the founder of his order. Okay?
It also stated recently that in his pictorial cross, that he has relics, and I think it's 5 of them, and 2 of them are St. Augustine of Hippo, his mother Martha. So he has great devotion to both of them, as well as our sister said, some other saints, but definitely those 2, because of, St. Augustine, was the patron saint of their order. So there's Martha, it's St. Augustine's mama, also a relic in his cross too.
They're telling us that by way of our virtual visitors in the chat room, someone asked whether I take private clients. I do, but as time permits. I do this daily at the Historic New Orleans Collection, so when I have spare time, I do take clients, but that's not an intentional plug, that's just a question that came in.
Another question? Yes, sister?
Sister Sylvia, about us in August. Again, the only African American August. About us being August, the sisters and how hopefully outside their people.
We applied in 1999 an aggregate to the Augustinians. That means that we not only follow the rule of Saint Augustine, but we are Augustinians. We're sisters of the Holy Family spirituality, but our rule of life is based on the rule of Saint Augustine. That's.
Could you hold on? Helen Marie is monitoring the chat for the Zoom, and she's having some people with questions. I'm gonna see if I can let you listen to it, because it's easier for her to tell it than me. Okay, let's see if they can hear you, Helen.
Okay, we have a question from G. Harward, and wanting to know, is there any way to know from the Sisters of the Holy Family which cousins were in the order in New Orleans? This would have been in the 50s. And they say my great aunt and 5 cousins were in the order of the Sisters of the Holy Family. Her name is Sister M. Agatha Thomas Zachary. And the cousins were all granddaughters of great aunt Azalie. I don't know if I said that correctly. Azalie Fournier Henry. And I just wondered if there's anything Sister could share with us about how to find out other cousins would fit in the order of the 50s.
We have the history of collection of all deceased sisters. We have the names and information about all the deceased members. We have also the records of all former members, those who came and didn't stay. We have those records. And then we have all the living records. So certainly, if we had their names, we could find it. We could give you information about them. Oh, and yeah, and the deceased listing is on our website, Sisters of the Holy Family website.
I wanted to say to sister who mentioned that we're sure why the sisters did not say free the enslaved person they had. I think from Shari's presentation and others, and what we do know is that many people either own their family members, as Shari presented to you, but also maybe this person was not able to take care of himself or herself. And so to free them meant, and they couldn't take care of themselves, it also meant that they would be sent back into slavery. So to be able to will that person to someone else and believing that they could take care of them, it kept them out of the hands of some other slave owner. I just wanted to make that comment.
It's true that there was a law that was passed, I think the 1830s. Any free slave could be re-enslaved unless they had to leave the state. And then there was a bond that had to be posted by their former slave owners. And so we believe that many of the former enslaved people who were abandoned were taken in by the sisters. And that's how LaFawn Nursing Home started.
Is the home aware of any of this? And it is how has he received it.
Okay, is the Pope, if you didn't hear, is the Pope aware of any of this history and how has he received it?
To my knowledge, he was not aware of any of this prior to. I can tell you that the whole rich diversity of the family story, Mr. Moore was not aware of up until what, maybe about 6 years ago. And so no. There is a video interview that the Holy Father, then Cardinal Prevost, did about a decade ago. And it was his understanding that all 4 of his grandparents were immigrants to this country. And that's not exactly correct. So I really don't think that he had any knowledge before that. I don't see how he couldn't have knowledge of it now, since it's been in the secular and religious press. But no response yet, and I'm not surprised by that. He has assumed a big role. And so hasn't probably had time to do any of that. I'll tell you this, I think y'all understand what I mean by this. This sort of revelation, and it is so common, Walter White, who was Mr. NAACP, used to say that every year about 5,000 Negroes conveniently forget their Negro blood. But so I just say that I like that little quick. This is how common this is to all of our families. We all have branches that have passed, but it couldn't have happened to a better person, because being open to enculturation, being inclusive of different cultures, that's what his entire ministry has been about. To be a Chicagoan, a baby boomer, born in 55 in Chicago, regular, Southside Chicago kid, and then spent 40 years on mission in South America, picking up 4 or 5 languages. I think that he's a global citizen, and again, it couldn't have happened to a better person. With that said, I do know that the Archbishop is slowly working on the groundwork for a papal visit. So hopefully he'll visit.
Yeah, as Jari said, the archdiocese is kind of, saying, hey, come visit. But we're working on a really big exhibit at the convent that's going to be like kind of a whole family tree of every single record that we have in the archive related to the Pope's family. And that should be going up in the next few weeks. And there's, with the PR team, a special invitation might get sent to the Pope. Obviously, he's not going to show up for that anytime soon, but the idea is that there's a very welcoming, sense of spirit within the archdiocese to hopefully have them one day come over and say hi and look at his family tree, right? I'd also like to add that part of his story is the story of the Creole diaspora. And so many of us were born in that diaspora, and then we didn't learn so much of our history. Maybe some of us sort of blended into the dominant population or the majority population, whatever. Or so many of our families just stopped using the word Creole or for various reasons. And there are so many of us who come back to Louisiana and then find, where we have this whole history. So in some ways that diaspora from either Chicago or Los Angeles or Texas, in some ways, it's an erasure of so much of this history. And I've interviewed many people who've talked about this. Okay, do we have another question? Yes.
The Archbishop said, great grandmother was baptized in this 1840,
Many of his ancestors. I mean, especially in the 18th century, the cathedral was the only church. So our earliest record that we have is of a baptism from the 1750s of an ancestor. Marriages, the earliest one is from 1728. So yeah, there's a really long history of his family within the cathedral. One of his great grandmothers was actually buried in the cathedral, which is pretty cool. So not a lot of ladies, got that honor. So she was buried at the foot of the altar to Mary in 1799.
Wow.
Any other questions? Are there any other questions online, Eva? No? Going once, twice? Thank you.
Well, sorry.
Thank you so much to the presenters. This was absolutely wonderful. Do we agree? Great, great. Thank you so much. We thank you, audience. Good then. If you have your surveys, please turn them in to us. And we do have water, drinks, cookies. Okay. We have extra surveys too. That will put them up. Thank you so much.